am a Java in our school. I was like, oh, I know what my project is now.
For Java, yeah.
And like, okay, so everything was copy pasted, crash, on run. Exactly. I was like, well, what did I do?
I have no idea.
You're on Android. Hey, it's different when you allow to figure it out. And even when I figured it out, it's like, okay, is this the right class or not? Like, it's like, will the Java work there? What kind of syntax?
Yeah.
Can I find one specific
It's just
snippet
the one
of code that I can copy paste and then find
That's
word?
what my whole thing is based on. It's like, I got this whole idea. I know approximately how to work in Java, but I have no code.
And I was actually
And the best part is I go over stuff that you normally don't think about the time when you get over those.
yeah.
It's like, well, I overloaded at the point that I can't like save my time.
Yeah.
Because you come in and go over your and then you answer your phone and it's like, thank you. Like, I feel so used to it.
That is not,
But
yeah,
somehow we get it working.
Yeah.
Finally.
I mean, it was fine. It's like 1,000 lines, but it's like much shorter. All it is you shuffle it and you get a random card, repeat until you finish shuffling everything.
Recursively, that would have showed the number.
I don't think it's ever a good idea.
Doing anything recursive on such a small
Set yourself up on camera. This is Roger, our sysadmin. He just sees a recursion line.
Done.
Do you even know how much
was on top last week.
Microphone to here. So that's because otherwise you'll be covering up the screen.
And did you have a laptop you needed to plug in or a
Sure.
thumb drive?
Either one, whichever one works best for you guys.
Laptop's probably good.
Okay.
That is, if it has a VGA.
You need to put your gear. I'm going to remove this. Just move to the right as much as possible, otherwise you'll be in the way.
Now it looks like I got a full battery, so I guess we don't need to plug it in.
Okay.
Oh, right here, right to the right.
Yeah, exactly. Is it projecting?
But well, it will when his computer recognizes video.
You can put this on the chair so that. Reading glasses? I thought you were younger than that.
They're only reading glasses. Yes.
Do you mean Windows?
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, it takes longer to resume than to boot.
Well, chocolates are wicked expensive. I know this.
I missed your call.
I know you said, come over here and give me a call. And it's like, you didn't answer. Wow.
I had turned off my phone.
I've been ignored by worse people. Hey, we have projection.
So I'm a rock therapy then, so I'm pretty confident. Probably it's not like that. Yeah, okay, so sure they have them.
Okay, gentlemen, can we postpone further discussion or something? So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the penultimate colloquium this semester. Next colloquium next week, next Thursday, will be our last, and it will be Sophie Engel, who will talk about insider risks. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Michael Freiling. Some of you know that the first half of my career in the academic world, I spent it at USF, University of San Francisco, and Michael was my best student over there. He could have been the best student of anybody. It wasn't just me. After graduating from USF, he went to MIT and in just a record time got his PhD. His thesis advisor was Seymour Papert, the fellow behind the Mindstorms. And after getting his PhD, he went to Kyoto University in Japan, where he was a Henry Luce scholar, started writing haiku in Japanese, then came back, had a brief career at Oregon State University in Corvallis, then became AI director at Tektronix, and after that decided to set up his own shop and has been doing high-level consulting with Washington Mutual and the Nielsen organization and many other places. And he is here today to tell us about payment risks, so let's welcome our speaker.
Thanks, George. Not sure I could live up to all particulars of that illustrious introduction, but when George mentioned that I used to write haiku, I did study Japanese when I was at Kyoto University for a year. And I remember one time I wrote one haiku. I don't think my teacher really appreciated it, but you start out with a nature theme, so the haiku said something like, "It's as white as the pure snow. This is really good laundry, isn't it?" So I'm sure as students you can all appreciate that. And also, it's very nice to be on a campus where the dorms appear to be named after wine varietals. That's really cool. So I'm really glad to be here. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are undergraduate students? How many are grad students? How many are faculty? How many are some other category? Okay, all right, just so I have a rough idea of how to pitch this talk. I'm going to run through things fairly quickly. There's a lot in this talk, starting with a sort of an attempt to reconceptualize where business is these days. This talk started out as a pitch for redefining the curriculum in the business school up at Portland State University. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about where I think the role of IT in business and how it's changing, and the fact that it's not really MIS anymore. Anybody who's in IT knows that. It's really what they call at Sloan School digital business. And I'm going to talk about that. And in the context of digital business, then, I'm going to talk about the payment system. And I will talk a little bit about what I'm going to do is sort of present the payment system as a business problem. And if you have any experience with business problems, one of the things you're going to know is that the technical part of the problem is a small part of the overall business problem. That there's a lot of other moving parts that have to match up with the technical part. And even when you're using the fanciest technologies, and there are commercial neural network solutions out there to help identify fraud potential, those systems are not going to work well unless they're surrounded by appropriate processes and appropriate other types of technologies to make everything work. Okay, so I'm going to sort of try and give you an appreciation for that as we go along here, and still wrap up by 11:45. Okay.
Better be 12:45, Michael.
Oh, 12:40. Yeah.
I'll do some time travel.
I'm jet lagged, even though I'm car lagged because I drove down from Portland last night. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what digital business is, what the the role of electronic payments is, what the sources of payment risk are, tools and processes for managing those. Okay, so this concept of digital business, it's not just e-commerce. We all know e-commerce, and we all know that if we can somehow conceptualize a photo sharing site, we might be worth $1 billion over $9 in a very short order. And that's great. But every business these days, even the old bricks and mortar, even the old industrial businesses, now have a digital component to them. Conceptually, you can have digital activity at anywhere along the value chain, from sales and marketing all the way back to product maintenance, right? Whoever carries around a product manual, if you have a problem with your cell phone, what do you do to get your product manual? Go to the web and you download it. Okay, if I had a lawnmower, the lawnmower broke, I downloaded the product manual for the lawnmower from the web. So even things like lawnmower companies, there are parts of the digital value, parts of the value chain where digital activity is very appropriate. Now, we haven't gotten to the state where you can sort of order a car online yet. Or maybe we are and I just don't know it. But even if the final delivery isn't there, a lot of other parts of the business can be done that way. Now, if that's the case, then when you have digital activity along the value chain, there are lots of spots where it might be appropriate to take a payment. Okay, obviously, if you are delivering a product, that's one of the places you're going to take a payment. But sometimes there's a service that's being provided that's ancillary to the product or helps support the product, and you're going to take a payment for that. A lot of sites are membership and subscription oriented, and so what you want to do there is you're going to give them your card, and your card's going to get charged regularly. Okay, so if you have this digital component to business, then you have to be able to take payments digitally over the web or in other parts of your system. If you have an e-commerce site, say, Expedia. I went to Expedia a couple of days ago and ordered a couple of airline tickets for my wife and her mom. So the whole transaction was digital. Type in my credit card. Of course, it didn't work. Had to find another one, get that one to work. And I'll talk about that in a second. Periodic billing utilities. Even somebody like a utility now is taking electronic payments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I probably don't have to belabor this too much. Okay, what I'm going to do, now that I've kind of motivated you to think about payments, I'm going to take you on a tour of some of the different types of payment systems, because there's a whole bunch. And each one's got its own different wrinkles. Okay, probably one of the ones you're most familiar with is credit card payments. Now, in the credit card payment system, you have a merchant who wants to sell you something, and you have a customer, that's typically you, who's purchasing something. But there's all kinds of people in between you and your merchant. Even if the merchant is a restaurant and you're sitting in the restaurant and you and the merchant are right there, when you hand the merchant your credit card, the data goes on a couple of round trips through a fairly convoluted path. You'll notice that in a credit card system there are two financial institutions that are involved. One's called the acquirer and one's called the issuer. The issuer is your financial institution, the one who has issued you the credit card. The acquirer is the financial institution representing the merchant. And what I didn't put in here is there can actually be a couple of other intermediaries here between the merchant and the actual acquirer bank that play a processing role or a sales role and handle parts of the processing. Okay? So here's how a credit card transaction works. How many of you know that a credit card transaction happens in two steps? Okay, well then you'll find this a very illuminating talk. This is important information. The first step is what's called authorization. Okay, let's say I'm at a restaurant, and I hand the waiter my card. The waiter goes back and swipes it in their system. That starts an authorization request. The authorization request goes through possibly a couple of levels, goes through the acquirer bank, goes over the Visa or the MasterCard network, goes to my issuer bank, and the purpose of the authorization request is to say, this guy wants to spend X number of dollars. Is that okay? And then my bank has the final word to say yes or no. And then if my bank says yes or no, then that information travels back across here. Then later on, when I've finished filling out the form and signed it and stuff like that, there's another transaction follows the same route called the settlement transaction. Goes through the acquirer bank, goes over the network, goes to my bank and says, this card has now settled for this amount. Now, one of the things that's interesting and can be actually quite relevant in a number of situations is the amount that I authorize for and the amount that I finally settle for are not the same. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why this can happen. I'll give you two. If I go to a restaurant, they're going to authorize for something like 20-25% more than I'm spending on the meal. Why is that? The tip. They want to make sure that they're good, my card is good for the tip. And of course, being optimists, they'll make sure that they don't get cheated. They only authorize for 10%. They might only get that because, well, I'll talk about that in a second. Here's another one. This is an odd one, but it becomes important. I'll talk about this more later on. When I go to a gas station, at least in the old days, and I swipe my card before I pump the gas, it would only authorize for $1. It wouldn't authorize because it wouldn't know how many gallons of gas I'm going to purchase, so just to be conservative, it would authorize for $1. Same thing with Redbox. How many of you have gone to Redbox to rent a movie? Okay, Redbox authorizes for $1, even though they may end up charging me, what, $17 or $18 if I don't return the movie, right? Okay, this is interesting. Part of the reason it's interesting is in this melange of participants, where does the liability reside? Pardon me?
The acquirer paying for the merchant?
The answer is sometimes. Okay? Sometimes it resides with the issuer bank. I'll tell you where it doesn't reside, and this is interesting now. Where it doesn't reside almost ever is with Visa or MasterCard themselves. Okay, that's a great business to be in because they participate in the global growth of credit and they have no credit liability at all themselves. Nice business. Okay. Generally speaking, the issuer, the default situation is that the issuer bank has the liability for the transaction. And that's why you have the initial authorization. Before I charge the card, I ask the issuer bank, can I charge the card? And the issuer bank says, yes, you may, or no, you may not. Okay? Now, that was typically the case roughly speaking, there's three primary ways in which you make a credit card payment. The first one's called swiped, right? I take my card and I run it through a little machine. The second one is called keyed. Somebody enters the credit card data on a keypad. This was most common when people were calling phone call centers and ordering stuff on phone. And the third one, as you might guess, is online. Okay? With me so far? Now, in the authorization request, and believe it or not, there's an ISO standard that governs the contents of that authorization request. In that authorization request, there is data to tell you which of those entry modes it is. And generally speaking, for swipe transactions, the liability resides with the issuer. For online transactions, the liability resides with the acquirer if the issuer claims fraud. Okay, the credit risk still lies with the issuer, but if the issuer claims that this was a fraudulent transaction, somebody stole the card, then the liability resides with the acquirer. And then there's some wrinkles if you know about how credit cards are going. Visa has tried to put in a system called Verified by Visa, which shifts the liability back to the issuer bank, and that's creating all kinds of interesting issues, but I think that's beyond what we want to talk about now. Okay? So, generally speaking, then the acquirer bank has to worry about the fraud, although the issuer bank will worry about the fraud, especially for swipe transactions, because they're on the hook for the liability. Okay, so there's a sort of a law of human nature here, and that is whoever's got the liability is going to worry most about the situation. Okay, let's look at debit card transactions. Debit cards transactions are almost identical to credit card transactions. You have an acquirer bank, an issuer bank, authorization, settlement. Two things you need to know. One is that the networks are different. Debit card transactions go over a different network than the credit card transactions, or they may go over a different network. And two, when you do a debit card transaction, you actually have the choice between signature verification and PIN verification, which you've probably noticed. And again, one thing that that's also worth pointing out, because this becomes relevant, is that there's a fee paid that the merchant has to pay off the top called the interchange fee. And it's a couple of, sometimes it's a couple of pennies, sometimes it can get a little bit more. It can even get up to the 20, 30 cent range. Okay, the interchange fee is actually highest for credit transactions, lower for signature-based debit transactions, and lower still for PIN-based debit transactions. And part of the reason why it's lower still is because the PIN-based transactions tend to be a bit more secure. There tends to be a little bit less fraud involved. Okay? One of the things that you probably have guessed already, it's implicit in what I'm saying, is that the issuer can decline a transaction for at least two different reasons. One of which are what we would call credit-related issues. You've gone over your credit limit, so we're not going to let you charge more. Or in a debit card situation, you don't have any money left in your account, or you don't have enough left in your account to pay for what you're asking for, so we won't let you buy this. Okay. The other one are fraud-related issues. I'm not sure this is the guy who really owns the card who's trying to buy this stuff now. Okay, and if you think about it, credit-related issues are relatively simple. Fraud-related issues can get very, very complex, because the people who execute fraud are organized, disciplined. There's a big business, and it probably mounts up to a significant fraction of the GDP of certain countries that I won't name. Okay, there's a lot of effort in credit card fraud. Now, there's simple schemes too. You know, my son had a debit card stolen a couple of years ago. It was actually down at the Oakland airport. And what the guy did, and this is sort of an individual scheme, the guy took the card, went straight to a gas station, and stood at the gas station and said, "Hey, I'll fill your car with gas for $10. Swipe the card, take $10, pump the gas. Swipe the card, take $10 to pump the gas." So my son's potential loss, was much, much bigger than 10 times, I think it was 3 or 4 fill-ups, and then he exhausted what was on the card. But the potential loss was like, 50 times 5, $250 rather than $50, because this guy was only taking 10, but he was pumping, say $20, $25, $50 worth of gas each time. Okay, that's sort of at one extreme. That's the lone opportunist. Okay, on the other hand, you have disciplined businesses that engage in fraud. And in fact, they are so disciplined they have supply chain management issues. They're so disciplined, they have division of labor. Okay, and the key division of labor in the fraud business is between those who make their money stealing credit card numbers and those who make their money exploiting those credit card numbers. Okay? And so you'll have rings, fraud rings, on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. One guy will steal the numbers and he'll sell it to somebody who will then take those numbers and say, try to use them to buy, 200 laptops at Fry's or something like that. Okay? Now, so here's an interesting question. How do you think the buyers, the credit card stealers and the credit card exploiters, they're called harvesters, the harvesters get together? On eBay. Actually, it's not eBay per se, but there are secret online sites that function just like eBay, where somebody says, I have 50 top U.S. bank credit card numbers, and I'm selling them for, and the going rate's around $50 a pop. Selling them for $50 a pop, who wants to buy them? And so you have other people will say, yeah, I'll take some, or I'll take 10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, then you have all of the e-business questions in the fraud ring situation. How do you guarantee the integrity of the guy you're buying? How much can you trust a thief? It's a fundamental problem there. Well, just like eBay, they rate the suppliers. Reviews and ratings and stuff like this. Now it's hard to get access to these sites because you typically have to read a language like Russian, just to take a random example, in order to be able to figure out what's going on. But there's a lot of banks in the U.S. now that have hired people who can read Russian to go to these sites and tell them what's going on and say, all right, have any of my cards been stolen lately? Okay. So it's big. So you go from the guy who's pumping gas at $10 a pop to a disciplined fraud ring that's trying to steal. One guy is hacking into some bank, Bank of America or something, stealing a bunch of credit card numbers, selling it on the web to somebody else who's then going to try to exploit those. Okay, we'll talk about some of the strategies in a little bit. Okay, now in addition to credit and debit card payments, yeah.
Who has the liability in the debit card payments?
It's the same thing. The credit liability goes to the issuer bank. The fraud liability goes to the issuer bank, except with online purchases, in which case it's at the acquirer. Okay. ACH transactions are very similar. There's a different terminology, but you don't have a 2 round trip system. The banks are called the ODFI and the RDFI. The ODFI is the originating depository financial institution. RDFI is the receiving depository financial institution. But receiving and originating doesn't mean the funds. It means the message to transfer the funds. The ODF, yeah, go ahead.
What is an ACH debit payment used for?
Well, if you've ever gone online to pay your utility bills and instead of using a credit card, you enter your bank routing number and your account number, that creates an ACH transaction.
So these like e-checks?
Yeah.
What does ACH stand for?
Automated clearinghouse. Okay. So it's a very similar scheme, except you don't have the authorization step. And it can be either a debit or a credit. Someone can issue an ACH to put money in your account, like your paycheck. So direct deposit, you have your paycheck, this is handled via ACH transactions. But also when you set up regular payment of your, say, electrical bill, that's handled via an ACH debit transaction where they send the message to pull the money out. Okay. ACH has not seen as much fraud as the credit and debit card arena, but it's starting to come on the radar screen as an area where fraud becomes an issue. And again, ACH can go either way, credit or debit. Now, once upon a time there wasn't ACH. There was only wire transfers. And wire transfers are a way that banks use to send money to each other on behalf of clients. They're typically used for very large sums. And there's a couple of networks, the Fed network, SWIFT, if you've heard of SWIFT. SWIFT was in the news lately because of the Iran situation, whether Iran was going to be allowed to execute SWIFT transactions. Those are the big networks that are used for transferring money between banks. Now, one of the interesting features of, just remember, I'm sort of trying to give you an appreciation this is a business problem. One of the interesting features of wire transfers, you would think that when big banks are wiring millions of dollars across these things, that they would have some sort of guarantee of how much of that money is going to show up at the end. And actually they don't. This becomes a particular problem if, let's say, you're trying to wire money to a business partner of yours in Estonia. I'm just going to pick a country. I don't know anything about Estonia, but I'm just going to pick a country. It could be that there are 3 or 4 correspondent banks that the wire transfer has to go through, and each of those correspondent banks has the right to deduct a certain processing fee as it goes along. So by the time it gets to your bank in Estonia, you actually don't know how much has been deducted. And this becomes a problem because obviously some banks might gouge you a little bit. So within the U.S., then, what caught this particular issue caused the creation of the what's called NACHA, the National Automated Clearinghouse Association that manages the ACH transactions within the U.S. And within those transactions, you do have guarantee that if I send $1,000, $1,000 is going to be received. If I have to pay a fee, I pay the fee up front. I know what that is, and that's okay. Okay. Then there's a whole bunch of alternative payment systems. Prepaid cards. Account-based systems such as PayPal. And then overseas funds transfers that are competing with the wire transfer operations. Bank of New York and Mellon have a thing so that if you're trying to wire money back to your family in, say, Latin America, you're not going to get gouged by all the bank fees. You can go to Bank of New York, Mellon, and just do a simple transaction for a fairly simple fee. So there's a whole bunch of other sort of ancillary payment systems. Obviously, PayPal is getting larger. Why do systems like PayPal exist? That's an interesting question. It turns out that if I want to take a credit card payment, I have to sign up with Visa as a merchant. And then there's a book, I don't know how thick it is, this thick, of regulations that I have to adhere to. One of the key regulations is my chargebacks cannot ever get over 1% of my transaction volume. So who knows what a chargeback is? What is it?
Customer declines the purchase after the fact.
Right. Customer says it wasn't me. I paid and I didn't get the merchandise, or disputes the transaction for any one of a number of reasons. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this, if you step back a second and you think about the economics of credit cards, who reaps the biggest benefit from credit cards?
Credit card companies.
Well, yeah. Okay. Let's take Visa out. Let's just say the two principal parties are the customer and the merchant. Whose advantage between those two? Whose advantage is most served by the credit card business? The merchant, because the merchant has more ways to get money. Okay. For the individual customer, all you have is convenience. Okay, and yeah, that has some value. But the merchant has real money as opposed to the intangible value of convenience. So if you are an economist and you would expect there to be a subsidy flowing, which way would you expect the subsidy to flow? From the merchant to the customer. And in fact, that's what the interchange fee is. A lot of that, it doesn't go to you, it goes to your bank to compensate them for the tremendous trouble of issuing you the credit card and the liabilities that they assume by doing that. Okay, that's the tangible subsidy. There's an intangible subsidy, and this is, as an individual consumer, this is really important to know. This is news you can use. Can't make yourself rich, but you can keep yourself out of trouble. When you dispute a transaction, if your bank is following the rules, they have to credit your account immediately. Now, some of them don't, because they assume you don't know what the rules are. But the Visa rules require them to credit your account immediately. And the burden of proof is always on the merchant bank, on the acquirer bank, not on the issuer bank. So that system, unless the, and it's almost like a beyond a reasonable doubt thing, unless the acquirer can conclusively prove that you were there, then the chargeback holds. That's what a chargeback is when you dispute the transaction. Now, why is the bias set up in favor of the customer? The reason is because if you lost faith in the card system and stopped using your card, a whole lot of people would stop making money off you. And they don't like that. So they want to keep you happy. That's another, that becomes another issue. I'll talk about that in a second, but just to give you a sort of a preview, it also becomes an issue in fraud. I could cut out all the fraud by turning down any transaction that was remotely suspicious. And what would happen? You'd fire your credit card processor or your issuer. I'm going to fire mine. I have a Bank of America card, and I've gotten 2 or 3 declines in the last 24 hours trying to buy stuff online, mostly airline tickets, because my mother-in-law is moving down here. We're moving a whole bunch of people around. I've gotten 2 or 3 declines. I called Bank of America on the first one. I said, well, we don't have any record of the authorization request. So then I thought it was an Expedia problem. But today I went to US Airways and tried to buy a ticket and had the same problem with the same card. So I'm going to fire Bank of America as my credit card. They're gone. Okay? If that happens to you enough, that you do what I'm going to do. You're out of here. Okay? What that means is that for the bank, and this is what separates a business problem from a technical problem, they have to tolerate a certain amount of fraud just to keep all their regular customers happy. So that leads you to a question. What's an acceptable level of fraud loss? How would you measure that? What would it be? Well, I'll give you the answer. The answer is, everybody know what a basis point is? The answer is 6 basis points. Okay. Everybody knows what a percent is? Okay, a percent is 1/100th of something. Okay, well, if I was going to measure fraud losses, what would I measure it as a percentage of?
0.06%.
Yeah, that's what a basis point is. A basis point is 1/100th of 1%. It's 1% of 1%, or 1/10,000th. I measure it in terms of transaction volume. So 4 to 6 basis points is pretty good. You start getting up to 8 to 10, things get a little bit iffy. You get up to 12, things get unhappy. Okay, that's just roughly speaking about where the industry is as a whole. Okay, this figures in the economics a lot of different ways. One way is if you've been to some other countries lately, Europe, the UK, Canada, Mexico, they have these new smart card debit cards that have a little chip embedded in the card. Those are incredibly secure. The fraud losses from those cards, when you have a reader for those cards, are very, very small. Why aren't they using them in the U.S.? Because 6 basis points of fraud isn't enough of a motivator to have all the banks start issuing all those cards. Some of the banks are issuing high-end, they're called chip and pin cards, high-end chip and pin cards for their elite customers who travel abroad a lot, because a lot of the abroad merchants now are only taking those kind of cards. Okay, but it won't get to the U.S. unless the fraud losses get much larger.
Why did they issue them in other countries?
Larger fraud losses, smaller infrastructure. In other words, a much smaller installed base that they had to basically rip out and replace. Okay. So, I've talked about all these, generally speaking, but I haven't talked about merchant risk. In this payment system, there's a lot of different sources of risk. Credit risk. Can the customer afford to pay me? Merchant risk. Is the merchant, if I'm the acquirer bank and I sign up with a merchant, is the merchant likely to be in business? Okay, now this can come back to bite the acquirer in some interesting ways. First of all, you probably realize that a chargeback can happen well after the initial transaction. Okay, and I'll give you an example. This happened from some work we did with one of the intermediaries between the acquirer bank and the merchants. Signed up a merchant who purported to be a travel agency. They came on stream in November, booking luxury cruises for the summer. So they booked cruises in November, December, January, February, March, April. The cruises didn't start till May. Around the end of April, they just sort of disappeared. And then the chargebacks started happening. And this processor was stuck with close to $1 million in chargebacks, and they couldn't find the merchant to get the chargebacks from. Okay? So that's merchant risk. That if I'm an acquirer bank and I sign up a merchant, I want them to be a reputable merchant. There are certain merchant categories that are inherently untrusted. Gambling. You can imagine some of the others. I don't need to get into the details. Okay. Fly-by-night. There's a lot of what they call recurrent billers. Sign up for our monthly supply of acai berries from on the web or something like that. Great for your health. Those kind of people are inherently untrustworthy. Okay, so there's merchant risk on the acquirer side. Fraud risk. Is the cardholder really there? And fraud risk can actually masquerade as credit merchant risk. Obviously, those those guys who set up that travel agency were fraudulent to begin with, but it forms in these risk categories. It shows up as the risk of signing up a merchant. Okay. Now the risks can cascade too. To give you one example, this is a really interesting case. Came from the same work we did. Beauty salon has a little e-commerce site here. A domestic U.S. beauty salon has an e-commerce site selling some special recipe for shampoo. Okay, and when the recession hit, they were having a little bit of trouble making ends meet. And they get a call from somebody in the Philippines who says, we love your product. We want to buy 10,000 lots of it. We give you our credit card number, ship it to this address in the Philippines, send this amount of money to the shipping expediter in the Philippines, and here's the credit card number. Go ahead and charge the card. So the merchant charged the card. Now the merchant probably should have thought twice about this, but they didn't because times were hard, and great, $10,000 order or something like this. So they charged the card, paid off the shipping expediter, sent the stuff to the Philippines. The card turned out to be invalid, drove the merchant out of business, and the acquirer got stuck with the balance. And the whole point of that fraud, what's the point of the fraud? The whole point of the fraud was that the shipping expediter was connected to the fraudsters, and they were just taking the money, which is the payment to the expediters, and just leaving the stuff on the dock. Okay. That ought to give you a sense for how sophisticated some of these schemes are and how many people can get whacked in the middle of them. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to... First-party fraud is when I commit the fraud myself. I'm the account holder. Check kiting is a good example. Second-party fraud is fraud perpetuated by employees. Third-party fraud is the big fish. And fraud perpetuated by unaffiliated people in unknown countries. Okay, I'll get to tantalize you with some other schemes. One of the typically things that happens if you steal a credit card is you want to test it out before you go and buy your big purchase. Historically, the primary test transaction was that $1 gasoline authorization that I just told you about a little bit a while ago. Okay, lately it's switched. Okay, small purchase just to make sure it goes through so that I know the card's valid. The advantage of the gasoline purchase was it was relatively anonymous because there wasn't anybody to look at me and get my description. But with the web, it's even better. I could do this in the comfort of my own home. So what's a small $1 like purchase?
Examination.
No. iTunes. Right. So iTunes is the big venue for test transactions now. Okay. It's also a big venue for what's called teenage fraud, which is a category of fraud executed by teenagers. So you see a whole bunch of iTunes, and then somebody says, these aren't mine. If a whole bunch of them, it's probably teenage fraud. If it's just one followed by a big purchase, it's test transactions. Okay, this becomes important information for the issuer bank because it means they have to think carefully when they get an iTunes order. Now, it's not just the dollar liability, but what does that do? Okay, what could that be signaling? What happens next? And one of the typical schemes that the issuer banks use is to actually let this transaction go through and then put a block on the account so the next transaction doesn't go through. And in the meantime, they try to call you and say, did you really authorize this transaction? Okay, so this happened to me a couple of years ago. I was at a business conference in Las Vegas, which I never go to. It's one of my least favorite places on earth. But I went and had lunch, paid with a credit card. Then I went over to the Bellagio to have a cup of espresso, and that got declined. And then I picked up my phone to call the bank, and I realized that there had been a call from the bank saying, hey, it looks like you're in Las Vegas. You just bought lunch. Call us and let us know you're in Las Vegas. Well, that was nice. Okay. Now, that particular example, I think, points out something I want to reinforce for you guys, because I know I've only got a few minutes left. That type of scheme is a combination of good technology, recognizing that Las Vegas is a place I don't usually go, and good process. Flagging that as a transaction that needed verification and routing it to a queue of somebody who would call my phone and say, we want to verify that you're in Las Vegas to minimize the customer inconvenience. Of course, I wasn't paying attention to my phone at the time, so I got inconvenienced anyway. Okay. A few other things I want to say. When it gets to the technology for handling these things, there's a whole array of technologies from these neural network products, Falcon, if anybody's heard of Falcon, from Fair Isaac, all the way down to just sort of handcrafted business rules. It turns out in practice, you need to have the whole array. The business rules have to surround and support these fancy neural network systems, or the neural network systems don't really do their job. I'll give you two examples. VIPs. Every bank has a set of customers that they call VIPs. And their tolerance for fraud on a VIP account is much higher because they're willing to absorb a lot more cost to avoid angering or discomfiting their VIPs. Well, the neural network-based fraud systems don't know a VIP from a hole in the ground. So when they come back with a high fraud score on a VIP card, there's usually a separate set of rules that are handcrafted for that company's policy to say, okay, this is a VIP. Let's just assume we're going to take the loss. How much would we allow that loss to be? So whereas you or I might get declined for, say, $1,000 purchase of a computer in Bulgaria, the VIP card would probably let that go through. Okay, it's just one example among many of how the banks have to solve this sort of multidimensional problem of not angering their customers but keeping the fraud losses low, using the fancy technology of the neural networks, but supporting it with things as simple as business rules in order to to come up with a coherent, business or economically sensible approach to these things. Okay, I think I'll let that go. I'll stick around for questions until George drags me out of here if you guys want to ask questions. Yeah?
I noticed on one of the previous slides you said up to 500 attempts at guessing the CVV2 value.
Yeah.
Why would any bank allow you to have 500 guesses? Because, I mean, unless you lost your glasses and you just can't read it, that seems like an awful lot of tries.
Yeah, yeah. What I was saying there is the CVV2 is 3 digits. CVV2 is that little 3-digit number that's on the back now that you have to, used to be secret, but now it's not so secret because you have to enter it just about everywhere. So what? With 3 digits, you have 1,000 possibilities. So on average, it only takes 500 random guesses to guess it.
So there's no. So
but no, the point of that is if the banks aren't very careful about setting those kind of limits, they can allow for those kinds of activities. Okay, it's surprising what banks don't check, and what happens as a result. I mean, it's. I can tell you story after story after story, but just to give you one example, a bank I'm very familiar with, people went in after hours and opened up the little, those little terminals they have at the teller stations now where you swipe your card. Open up the terminals, put little radio transmitters in them to transmit the numbers, via whatever, Bluetooth or something like that, and had some guy in a car outside just sort of capturing the numbers. The bank lost a couple of million until they figured out that the PIN terminals in their branch, in their hometown, in fact, it was the branch in the lobby of the corporate offices, had been compromised. Okay. Yeah, go figure. Any other questions?
Some banks even let bad CVV go through.
Yeah, I mean, again, banks are businesses, and they're going to have different philosophies. And some of them are, I don't want to inconvenience my customers. And some of them are, I'm going to be super aggressive about fraud. And, people will sort of, over time, sort of self-select for the bank that serves their needs the best. But yes, a lot of banks, some knowingly choose not to check those things. Some just, for one reason or another, just haven't gotten around to it. Yeah?
What's the risk in the case, I don't know if you read about the Lucky's, I think it was Lucky's or something, where all their store ATM machines,
yeah,
similar thing to your,
they're
missing numbers out of them.
Okay.
Who's accountable for that? As far as who pays out, is it Lucky's that has to pay because their machines got compromised, or is it credit card company?
I believe that on the first round, it's the issuer. The issuer has to go back to you and offer you special protection and obviously reissue your card and stuff like this. When the fraud spreads, the fraud goes wherever, and the liability for the fraud, depends on the specific merchant and the specific issuer and the specific conditions of the transaction. I don't know if it's a retail store. I haven't heard. I don't know of any specific instances where they've had to pay up or cover those losses. When it's somebody in the main food chain, like one of those processors, there were some compromises at Alliance Data recently, or not at Alliance Data, Epsilon. I think that's a different situation because there's business ramifications along the way. Yeah.
What about fraud at account-based systems like PayPal?
Well, first of all, there's obviously fraud attempts in systems like that. PayPal is pretty sophisticated in terms of the technology they use to try to get that. But they're a prime candidate for phishing. I don't know, how many times you get, your PayPal account. I don't have a PayPal account. What's this coming out from? But the very similar kinds of issues. What you have to do is when you get the data, you have to sort of look at the data and say which combinations of parameters do I think represent high risk. one of the most interesting is that the authorization request contains enough geocoding that I can roughly estimate how many miles from home this transaction is being executed. And that turns out to be a key variable in a lot of cases. Any more questions? Okay, thanks.
Just a question. I don't know if you know much about this, but what's your opinion on the modern decentralized payment networks like Bitcoin? Do you know anything about that?
Oh, you mean the digital cash business?
Yeah.
No, I don't know much about it. I'll tell you what my instinct is. My instinct is that there's a theoretical impossibility with doing that. You know, if I can have a bit stream that it can be anonymous, then why can't it be copied and used someplace else anonymously? I haven't followed the technical arguments.
They wave math at you and say it's impossible, but I don't. Yeah.
Well, you can make it very complicated, but I mean, let's put it this way: if it's digital cash, then all you have is the bit stream. There's no ancillary checks and balances or verification or anything like that. The only verification, again, if it's truly anonymous, because I think the goals of these things are to make it anonymous. If it's not anonymous, it's just another account scheme masquerading as digital cash. Okay, but if it's truly anonymous, then I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Okay.
Got her up your stuff.
Let me put this in hibernate mode.
I know. I'm like, what the hell's happening today? There's like no people.
All right. Well, just
Anyway, that's my feeling.
okay.
I would ask George, though. I think I'd like to hear George's opinion on that.
On Bitcoin.
Our digital cash
Bitcoin.
schemes.
Well, the short answer is I'll talk to you later. The mysterious Japanese inventor of Bitcoin nobody has ever met. By the way, later on this afternoon you'll be on YouTube.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
2 cameras.
Oh, gosh.
One has a projector.
Oh.
Well, there's all these parasitic industries like Hotels.com or Expedia or Orbitz. They first wiped out all the travel agencies. First of all.
Yeah.
Secondly, they gouge the small operators. You know, so if you're not Hyatt or you're not one of the huge chains, Best Western doesn't even need them.
Right.
You can go just to Best Western. And the big question for me was, why not go to United Airlines site instead of go for Expedia?
Well, that's what I do.
Yeah.
What I do is I use Expedia as a strategic tool to figure out how to lay out.
Yeah, he's a pretty good grader. I had him for 205, and he was pretty good. But in that class, we got so much homework, and we had like 5 tests, and he dropped our So it was like, yeah, definitely. And it was like no paper. It was like just that. It's going to be hella hard. Yeah. I mean, like chapter 12, I started on chapter 12, it's not too bad, but it's like, I mean, it's like exchange rates and stuff. Yeah. Oh, that's right. It's cumulative, huh? Oh my god, I forgot. Well, luckily we're doing that in my investments class right now, so that'll help me brush up a little bit. Who does like cumulative finals? No one.
Also, next week's Colloquium. Also, there are special speakers that are coming for out there the next few weeks as well, which means
It's also been more interesting than usual. Trust me, it can only take so many.
That's right. Hopefully we'll do like the main topics from like each unit, you know.
But it's like it's Euler's final test, so
One of
it's
the
not.
things
It's like
that-
So it's not even his again.
No,
He's taking out.
it never does.
done in Euler's a lot of focus on cryptography.
Spend so much time in that admin.
Specifically,
Everything's been Euler.
focus on like recently the
That dude's cool. I was trying to do my econ minor, so I had to meet with him like last week.
has to do with.
He's super nice. He's way young. I was like not expecting that. Yeah, but he's like super young. I know.
No, very lucky test.
It tripped me out because like half the classes haven't reset the things for like daylight savings
Yeah.
time or whatever.
So you never.
So yeah, I was like taking a test in my finance class, and I was like, "There's no way that test only took me 45 minutes." Like I felt like I was sitting for way longer. Like they go out and it's like 5 minutes to my next class. I was like, "Oh shit."
So Wes was part of the administration here, or?
He used to run like the CSU and UC stuff. Like he did all that. Like my like my boss's mom works at Berkeley or something, and he used to be her boss. But when I took his 205 or whatever, he that was his first semester back teaching in like 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and then he took a year off, and now he's back right now. So it's like, but all right. But yeah, he used to like run shit. I think that's why he gets a little lost in his teaching, if you've noticed.
Because he hasn't taught so long.
Yeah.
So he was originally a professor
Yeah.
here, and then
Uh-huh.
he went to administration.
Yeah. Which is cool. I'm gonna stick with that if I could, but
With the administration.
Yeah.
Probably pays a lot more.
yeah, definitely. Chilling in an office somewhere, don't have to worry about like grading papers and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you a finance major?
Economics.
Okay.
Yeah. We have a full class today.
It's filtering out slowly but surely.
Oh, there's nobody here.
Well, we got here like 5 minutes ago. There was like hella people in here, and it was like,
They're doing like a seminar or
what's
something.
that?
You know, I have heard actually one time I was sitting in here, because most of the time there's nobody in here, so I come and sit in here.
Uh-huh.
But there's apparently some class that I don't know if they like meet once a month or
Oh.
what, but
Oh.
there apparently
It
is
sounds
a
like
class.
accounting or something from the way that people were talking about it. No idea
Oh,
what
maybe
it
that's
is.
what it is.
Yeah.
Once a month class.
One day I was sitting in here though, and some girl came and she said, "There's a class in here. It's this and this, and it's at this time." I was like,
Probably an online class.
I'm sure.
"There's nobody here."
Yeah. The once a month.
That's
like,
true. That maybe meets once in a while or
requisite,
something.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm so tired.
My
We'll see.
Stuff down and hope it
You think these
sticks.
could have done great, or could have just bombed. I mean, I won't know.
Right.
I felt like my answers were correct.
I thought they were right, but they would have been like.
Seemed pretty solid to me.
Right.
I actually felt really confident about the first part of the questions, and then the second part. Well, I mean, obviously, the second part I was like,
Well, I did the A, but the B is really.
So I didn't even write A and B. I told myself, it all just kind of blends together.
It's one
You
question.
find the answer in there. Both parts should be there.
I ran into that problem too, though. Like where I would write some information down, but then go to the next question and think, oh, actually that fit
I
better
did
too.
it first.
It's kind of already.
Ditto. You said we could just write interest rates down as the answer for most of them. You're right.
Oh, yeah?
It's all about interest rates.
You draw a lot of graphs.
Yeah. I did one or two graphs. Probably did one or two that I didn't need to do. But,
It's such a waste. It's such a big class and
I know.
Is this what is every time?
My 470 class is like that too. There's only like 6 people that like show up now consistently, and he just gives us hella extra credit now for showing up. It's like, all right, sweet.
Modest. Only the curious. Huh?
Yeah. Is that how I took it?
Thank you. What do you? 99.
What? it.